Thanks for reminding me, folks. Hi. Under the old system, our health care was better than it was before our modern health care came about, before Obamacare. Yes. Some people were left out. There's been studies show more people are left out today than were left out then. When the big ship gets a hole in it, and you don't want it to sink and kill everybody, you close off some of the doors. Well, what if there are people inside the doors you close off? You have to let them perish to save the whole ship. Under socialism, you leave the doors wide open and the whole ship goes down and everybody perishes. Under capitalism, some people are left out. The door is closed to them, but the rest of us, most of us, survive. Do you think that's a harsh comparison? Again, I don't know what my sister's going. She had to spend 3 days in the hospital. She's on her way to recovery. The medical bill, probably 10 or 20,000 bucks. Maybe she'll get Medicaid. I don't know. One of my nieces, $6,000 deductible. Got married 2 years ago and finally she's pregnant. Unless her mother, my other sister, can come up with Medicaid, they're going to have to somehow come up with 6,000 bucks, which they do not have. $6,000, 3,000 for her and 3,000 for the baby before the insurance kicks in. Deductibles. Anyway, Truman did not get health care. Civil rights. Truman did not get the Civil Rights Act passed. That's kind of sad, but eventually Johnson did, 2 presidents later. Eisenhower was not interested in civil rights. This, your book will say this, I know from other sources. Aid to education. All right, folks. As soon as this class is over, I'm going to visit my daughter in Athens, who is a public school teacher. Her first year and her last. She was telling us last night how bad those students are to cheat, to talk back to you, to tell her that they don't have to get quiet when she asks them to. Disrespect is rampant. I mean, hey, it was bad enough when I taught. What she's describing is worse. When the federal government eventually got involved in education, education went downhill. Now, fast forward a little bit to modern time. President Bush, the second President Bush, got the No Child Left Behind Act passed, which was designed to make the schools educate the kids. The schools protested. The No Child Left Behind was unfunded. And the federal government is finally turning education back over to state and local authorities. That's in your book now, if you read chapter 31. Or maybe chapter 30, one of those 2 chapters. It's in your book. I think it's chapter 31. The federal government has no business educating your kids. I homeschooled all 3 of mine. And I can't say they were the worst for it. All right. Anyway, your book says that Truman gave so much attention to Europe and Korea, foreign affairs, Europe, Korea, and China and Japan, that he did not prove to be effective in domestic matters. Sometimes the job was undoable. Now came something else that was really bad going on at the time, the Red Scare. The second Red Scare. All right. The first Red Scare occurred after the communist takeover in 1917. It went on in 1919-20. The second Red Scare was worse. A man named Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy began to accuse everybody in sight of being communist, and a lot of persons lost their jobs. College professors, teachers, actors, actresses, government workers, even people working in the private sector were accused of being communist and lost their jobs, and everybody was afraid to point their finger at McCarthy. Nobody would stand up to him. Finally, though, McCarthy really made Eisenhower became the next president of Truman, made Eisenhower very angry when McCarthy began to say the Army is being taken over by communists. And Ike had been a 5-star general in the Army. He said enough is enough. The Senate finally censured McCarthy. McCarthy was eventually unelected, became an alcoholic, and died, I believe, in a drunken stupor or something close to it. His life was shortened. Now, there's another side to this. I had a pupil write a paper on McCarthy, and he said he believed McCarthy was a good man, that McCarthy did more good than harm because there was a communist movement to take over America, infiltrate from within, and McCarthy did a lot to expose. Now, a lot of the people McCarthy exposed were innocent. Were innocent, but some of them might have needed to be exposed, particularly Alger Hiss, probably was working secretly with the communists. And again, we know about the Rosenbergs and Whittaker Chambers. A lot of them really were. So there was reason to be afraid because a lot of Americans high up found communism appealing for reasons I've already mentioned. And also, when I was young, a lot of the professors in my day were communists. I had one at UT. Pinckney, by name, Paul Pinckney, was an open communist. But that was in the early 1970s when being a communist was not illegal. All right. The thing that really made Truman won the election of 1948, by the way. And he got to be president in his own right. But Congress went to the Republicans. But the thing that really did Truman in 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, believing that the United States would not go to war. To North Korea's surprise, President Truman ordered General Douglas MacArthur, who had been a famous general in World War II, ordered MacArthur to go into South Korea and fight. Initially, the war went back and forth. Initially, American troops were unprepared and the North Korean communists won big. But then, President Truman sent over more troops with better training and better equipment, and they largely drove the communists far deep into their own territory. But MacArthur was given orders, don't get too close to China. MacArthur went and violated those orders, and got close to China and drew China into the war. And this was what Harry Truman did not want to do. Now, to make a long story short, Truman fired MacArthur. At first, everybody in the country reacted, who does he think of? MacArthur's doing a good job. It has been said that if Roosevelt had still been president, Roosevelt would not have fired him, man. Roosevelt would have simply made it look like a promotion. Hey, we're going to move you from Japan to Europe and give you a nicer office and nicer facilities, and we're going to promote you just to get him out of, made it look like a promotion. And that way Roosevelt would have looked good. Instead, Truman made himself look bad. But I'll tell you, as time has gone on, it's one of those situations where at first everybody sides one way, but then as time goes on and people begin to think it through, hey, Harry Truman really was the president and MacArthur should have obeyed Truman. We must have, folks, civilian control of the military. When Washington was president, he'd address the troops in a military uniform. After all, he'd been a general. John Adams had never been in the army, but he'd addressed the troops in a military uniform. Thomas Jefferson addressed the troops in civilian clothes. Mr. President, don't you know that when you're standing in front, you should be in a uniform? Jefferson said, no, I'm a civilian and I'm going to look like a civilian. So when I'm standing in front of the troops, I want to dress like a civilian because I am one. And from that day till this, hardly any president would dare stand in front of the troops dressed in a military uniform. The President of the United States civilian. Eisenhower resigned from the Army when he ran for office. He became a civilian. As a military man, he could not leave the country, so he became a civilian. But anyway, civilians must control the military. There are 3 civilians who have more authority than even the 5-star general. They are the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Undersecretary of Defense. and all officers are trained, you must obey your civilian commanders. MacArthur didn't. He got fired. Anyway, the Korean War ended when Eisenhower became president. Actually, I'll take that back. It didn't end. Eisenhower achieved a truce. That meant that both sides agreed to quit shooting at each other, and they drew a line and said, we'll stay on our side, and you stay on yours. The Korean War benefited the Koreans in South Korea. They have had more than 70 years of freedom, and they have prospered. But when the line was drawn, everybody listening, North Korea got all the good farmland and South Korea got the worst. I said North Korea got the good farmland. Today, North Korea is starving. Well, didn't you just say North Korea got the good farmland? Yes, then how come they're starving? In one word, it's communism. But they blamed the United States. South Korea is prospering. South Korea has industrialized. They've copied the Japanese. Again, Truman's efforts were worth it, but the Korean War cost Truman his popularity, and Truman would not dare run against Eisenhower, so Truman did not seek a third term. Eisenhower was nominated. He chose Richard Nixon as his running mate, and that takes us up to the next chapter, chapter 27.